The lab results arrived on a Tuesday, and Dr. Savannah Grace wished they hadn't. The genetic sequencer had identified something that should have been impossible. A DNA marker that mapped directly to violent behavior in every single test subject. 23 criminals, 23 matches, and now her own saliva sample stared back at her with the same terrifying pattern. Savannah's hands trembled as she held the printout, her coffee growing cold on the cluttered desk of her university laboratory. 3 years of research into the biological foundations of criminal behavior had led to this moment, but she never expected to find herself among the data points. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across her face as she read and reread the results, hoping for an error that wasn't there. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister Emma. "Still coming to dinner Sunday? Mom's making your favorite." The normalcy of the message felt surreal against the backdrop of her discovery. How could she sit at her childhood dining table, passing potatoes and making small talk, knowing what lurked in her genetic code? The same code that apparently linked her to rapists, murderers, and sociopaths. The laboratory door creaked open, and her research partner Marcus stepped inside, his usual cheerful demeanor immediately dampening when he saw her expression. "Savannah, you look like you've seen a ghost. Did something happen with the sequencing results?" She couldn't meet his eyes. Marcus had been her closest friend since graduate school, the one person who understood her obsession with understanding evil at its most fundamental level. He'd supported her through endless grant applications, failed experiments, and academic politics. But how could she tell him that his best friend might be genetically predisposed to violence? "The results are complicated," she managed, sliding the papers into a manila folder with shaking fingers. "I need more time to analyze them before we discuss anything." Marcus frowned, stepping closer to her desk. "Savannah, we've been working on this project together for 3 years. Whatever you found, we should review it together. That's how this partnership works." The concern in his voice made her chest tighten with guilt. She'd always prided herself on being transparent, methodical, and ethical in her research. But this discovery felt too dangerous to share, too personal to examine under the harsh light of scientific scrutiny. What if Marcus looked at her differently? What if everyone did? "I know, I just ... double quote." She paused, searching for words that wouldn't reveal too much. "The implications of this research are bigger than we anticipated. If we're right about this genetic marker, it could change everything we understand about criminal justice, free will, and personal responsibility." That much was true, though it barely scratched the surface of her real concerns. The marker they de-identified didn't just suggest a predisposition to violence. It appeared in subjects across the entire spectrum of criminal behavior, from petty theft to serial murder. If the pattern held true, it meant that some people might be born with a biological inclination toward evil acts. Marcus pulled up a chair beside her desk, his expression growing more serious. "Savannah, that's exactly why we need to be careful and thorough. If we publish prematurely, we could cause panic or, worse, discrimination against people based on their genetics. But if we bury this research because we're afraid of the implications, we're not serving science or society." His words hit too close to home. Was she considering burying the research to protect herself, or was she genuinely concerned about the broader implications? The line between scientific caution and personal cowardice felt increasingly blurred. "You're right," she said finally, though her stomach churned with the admission. "But I want to run additional tests first. Expand the sample size, double-check our methodology, maybe even test some control groups to make sure we're not seeing false positives." It was a reasonable request that bought her time to figure out what to do about her own results. Maybe she could find an error in her sample or discover that the marker didn't mean what they initially thought. Maybe there was still hope that she was ungenetically predisposed to become the kind of person she'd spent her career studying. Marcus nodded slowly, though she could see the curiosity burning in his eyes. "How long do you need?" 2 weeks, she said, pulling a number from thin air. "Give me 2 weeks to verify everything, and then we'll sit down and go through all the data together." After Marcus left, Savannah locked the laboratory door and pulled her own results back out of the folder. The genetic marker stared back at her like an accusation, a biological destiny she never asked for. She thought about her childhood, searching for signs of the violence that supposedly lived in her DNA. Had she been crueler than other children, more aggressive? She remembered pushing a classmate off the playground equipment in 3rd grade, but that seemed like normal childhood conflict, not a harbinger of evil. The rational part of her mind knew that genetics wasn't destiny. Environmental factors, personal choices, and social influences all played crucial roles in shaping behavior. Having a predisposition didn't guarantee an outcome. But the fearful part of her wondered if she'd been fighting against her own nature her entire life without realizing it. As the sun set outside her laboratory window, casting long shadows across the floor, Savannah made a decision that would change everything. She would find others like her, people who carried the marker but lived normal, law-abiding lives. If she could prove that genetics wasn't destiny, she could save both her research and her peace of mind. But first, she had to understand exactly what she was dealing with. And that meant diving deeper into the darkness than she ever intended to go. 3 days into her secret investigation, Savannah discovered she wasn't alone. The university's genetic database contained 12 other faculty and staff members who carried the same marker, though none of them knew it yet. Her hands moved across the keyboard with practiced efficiency, cross-referencing employee records with genetic samples from the campus health initiative she'd helped design 2 years earlier. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd advocated for the voluntary genetic screening program to help identify hereditary diseases, never imagining she'd use it to hunt for potential killers among her colleagues. Each name that appeared on her screen felt like a small betrayal of the trust people had placed in the research community. Dr. Patricia Wong from the chemistry department, James Miller from campus security, Sarah Thompson from the psychology graduate program. Names and faces she recognized from faculty meetings, coffee shops, and campus events. People who seemed perfectly normal, even admirable in their dedication to education and service. Savannah printed their photos and basic information, creating what felt disturbingly like a suspect board in her locked laboratory. The faces stared back at her from the wall, a collection of individuals whose only crime was sharing her genetic predisposition. She studied each photo, searching for signs of the violence that supposedly lurked in their DNA, but found only ordinary people living ordinary lives. The revelation both relieved and confused her. If all these people carried the marker but functioned normally in society, what did that say about her research? Were they all ticking time bombs, or was the genetic predisposition meaningless without specific environmental triggers? Her phone rang, jolting her from her thoughts. The caller ID showed her mother's number, and guilt washed over her as she realized she'd missed their usual Wednesday evening call. "Savannah, honey, I was worried when you didn't answer yesterday." Her mother's warm voice filled the laboratory. "Is everything all right at work?" The question hit harder than her mother could have known. Was everything all right? She was secretly investigating her colleagues based on their genetic profiles while hiding her own potential for violence. It felt like the opposite of all right. Just busy with a research project. "Mom, you know how it gets when I'm close to a breakthrough." The lie came easier than she expected, which worried her. Was deception another sign of her genetic predisposition? "Well, don't work yourself to death, sweetheart. Your father and I are proud of the work you're doing, but we want you to take care of yourself too." After hanging up, Savannah stared at the photos on her wall with fresh eyes. These people all had families who loved them, colleagues who respected them, students who looked up to them. They were contributing members of society, not the monsters her research suggested they might become. She decided to start with Dr. Patricia Wong, whose laboratory was just 2 buildings away. If she could observe Patricia discreetly, maybe she could learn something about how people with the genetic marker actually behaved in their daily lives. The next morning, Savannah positioned herself in the campus coffee shop with a clear view of the chemistry building. She felt ridiculous playing amateur detective, but she needed answers that couldn't be found in genetic sequences or academic papers. She needed to understand the human reality behind the scientific data. Patricia arrived at 7:30 a.m., just as Savannah's research had predicted based on her security badge data. She watched the older woman purchase her usual green tea and a blueberry muffin, chatting pleasantly with the barista about the weather. Nothing about her demeanor suggested violence or aggression. She seemed like exactly what she was, a dedicated chemistry professor starting another day of teaching and research. Savannah followed at a distance as Patricia walked to her building, noting how she held the door open for a struggling student carrying heavy textbooks. She even stopped to help when the student dropped his materials, gathering papers with patient efficiency while offering reassuring words about the upcoming exam. The observation continued for 3 days, and Savannah documented every interaction, every behavior, every small kindness she witnessed. Patricia mentored struggling graduate students, collaborated cheerfully with colleagues, and even volunteered at the campus food bank on Thursday evenings. If this woman carried genes for violence, they were remarkably well hidden. The pattern held true for James Miller as well. The campus security officer she observed next showed nothing but professionalism and genuine concern for student welfare. She watched him de-escalate a heated argument between two fraternity brothers with impressive calm, using humor and empathy to diffuse tension rather than authority or force. By the end of the week, Savannah's secret observations had revealed something that challenged everything she thought she knew about her research. The people who carried the genetic marker weren't monsters waiting to be unleashed. They were functional, contributing members of society who seemed, if anything, more consciously kind and controlled than average. The realization forced her to confront an uncomfortable possibility. Maybe the genetic marker wasn't a predictor of inevitable violence, but rather an indicator of people who had to work harder to control aggressive impulses. Maybe she and the others had developed stronger ethical frameworks and self-control precisely because they carried this genetic burden. Saturday evening found her back in the laboratory, staring at the wall of photos with new understanding. She'd spent the week expecting to find evidence that would condemn her colleagues and herself, but instead she'd discovered something that might actually vindicate them. People with the genetic marker weren't automatically evil. They might just be individuals who had learned to be deliberately good. But her relief was short-lived. If her hypothesis was correct, it meant that the genetic predisposition was real and required constant vigilance to control. It meant that she and others like her were always one bad day, one major stressor, one moment of weakness away from becoming the criminals in her original study. The question that kept her awake that night wasn't whether she could control her genetic predisposition, but whether she could trust herself to recognize the signs if that control ever began to slip. And more importantly, what she would do if she ever felt herself changing into someone she no longer recognized. The email arrived on Monday morning, innocent enough to fool anyone except Savannah. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell from the National Institute of Mental Health wanted to discuss her research on genetic predisposition to violence. The message mentioned reviewing her published papers and potentially collaborating on a larger study. It should have been the opportunity of a lifetime, but something about the timing felt too convenient. Savannah read the email 3 times, analyzing every word for hidden meaning. Dr. Hartwell claimed to be impressed by her methodology and wanted to schedule a video call to discuss expanding the research with federal funding. The offer was everything she'd worked toward, but her paranoia had grown stronger over the past week of secret observations. She ran a quick internet search for Dr. Hartwell and found an impressive academic record, numerous publications, and legitimate credentials. Everything checked out, but that only made her more suspicious. If someone wanted to investigate her research or her personally, they would create a perfect cover story. Marcus knocked on her laboratory door, interrupting her spiraling thoughts. "Savannah, we need to talk. I've been patient about giving you space, but people are starting to ask questions about our research timeline." She minimized her email and tried to look casual as she let him in. What kind of questions? The department head asked me yesterday if we were having problems with the genetic sequencing. I told him everything was fine, but I can't keep covering for you if you don't tell me what's really going on. Marcus sat down across from her, his expression more serious than she'd ever seen it. 3 weeks ago, you were excited about being close to a breakthrough. Now you're acting like you discovered something terrible. The weight of her secret felt heavier with each passing day. Marcus deserved to know the truth, but telling him would mean admitting her own genetic predisposition and potentially exposing the other faculty members she'd been investigating. It would mean acknowledging that their research had identified a biological marker that could be used to discriminate against innocent people. What if we did discover something terrible? She asked carefully. What if our research could be used to justify genetic discrimination or predict criminal behavior before any crime is committed? Are we prepared for those consequences? Marcus leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. Savannah, you're scaring me. What exactly did you find in those test results? Before she could answer, her phone rang with an unknown number. She almost ignored it, but something compelled her to answer. The voice on the other end was smooth, professional, and immediately familiar from her internet research. Dr. Grace. This is Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell from Nime. I hope I'm not calling at a bad time, but I wanted to follow up on my email about your fascinating research on genetic predisposition to violence. Savannah's blood chilled. She hadn't responded to the email yet, so how did Dr. Hartwell know she'd read it? She mouthed, "Sorry," to Marcus and stepped outside the laboratory to take the call. Dr. Hartwell, thank you for your interest in my work. I was just reviewing your email this morning. Excellent. I've been following your research for some time now, and I believe what you've discovered could have significant implications for criminal justice and public safety. Would you be available for a brief video call this afternoon? I'd like to discuss the possibility of expanding your study with federal resources. The conversation felt rehearsed, as if Dr. Hartwell already knew exactly what Savannah had discovered. I appreciate the offer, but my research is still in preliminary stages. I'm not ready to discuss collaboration yet. Of course, Dr. Grace, but perhaps you'd be interested to know that we've been conducting similar research with much larger sample sizes. We've identified the same genetic marker you found, and we're particularly interested in studying individuals who carry the marker but don't exhibit criminal behavior. Savannah's grip tightened on the phone. There was no way Dr. Hartwell could know about the genetic marker unless she'd been monitoring the research somehow. I'm not sure I understand what you're suggesting. I think you understand perfectly, Dr. Grace. You've tested yourself, haven't you, and several of your colleagues. We know about Dr. Wong, Mr. Miller, Miss Thompson, and the others. The question is, what do you plan to do with that information? The parking lot seemed to spin around her. Someone had been watching her research, monitoring her database access, tracking her secret investigation. She felt exposed and vulnerable in a way that went beyond academic competition or professional rivalry. Who are you really? She whispered into the phone. I'm exactly who I said I am, Dr. Grace. a researcher interested in understanding the genetic basis of violence. But unlike you, I have the resources to act on that understanding. We can help you manage your condition and the conditions of others like you. All we ask is your cooperation." The word condition hit her like a physical blow. They weren't just monitoring her research, they were treating her genetic predisposition like a disease that needed to be managed. The implications were terrifying. "I need time to think about this," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Of course. But don't take too long, Dr. Grace. Others are watching your research as well, and not all of them have benevolent intentions. We'll be in touch soon." The line went dead, leaving Savannah standing alone in the parking lot with the horrible realization that her discovery had attracted attention from people who saw her, and others like her as problems to be solved rather than human beings to be protected. When she returned to the laboratory, Marcus was gone, but he'd left a note on her desk. "Whatever you're hiding, you don't have to face it alone. Call me when you're ready to trust me with the truth." That evening, as she sat in her apartment reviewing everything that had happened, Savannah realized she had reached a turning point. She could continue hiding her discovery and hope that Dr. Hartwell and her mysterious organization would leave her alone, or she could take control of the situation before someone else made the decision for her. The genetic marker had already changed her life in ways she never anticipated. Now she had to decide whether it would define her future as well. Tuesday morning brought a package to Savannah's office with no return address. Inside, she found a thick manila envelope containing photographs that made her stomach drop to the floor. Pictures of her entering the coffee shop, observing Patricia Wong, following James Miller, accessing the genetic database after hours. Someone had been documenting her every move for the past 2 weeks. The final photo showed her standing in her own laboratory, pointing at the wall of faculty profiles she'd created. The angle suggested it had been taken from outside her window, which meant someone had climbed 3 stories or used advanced surveillance equipment. Either possibility terrified her. A single sheet of paper accompanied the photographs. "Your research has attracted the wrong kind of attention. Meet us tonight at Riverside Park, 9 p.m., East Entrance. Come alone, or these photos go to the university administration and the local police. Dr. Hartwell isn't the only one interested in your discovery." Savannah's hands shook as she held the note. The message implied that multiple parties were now involved in whatever conspiracy had formed around her research. Dr. Hartwell represented one faction, but apparently there were others with different agendas. She called Marcus immediately, her decision made in that moment of panic. If she was going to face this situation, she needed someone she trusted to know the truth. "Marcus, I need you to come to my laboratory right now. Don't ask questions, just come. And bring your laptop." He arrived within 15 minutes. Taking one look at her pale face and the scattered photographs before closing the laboratory door and engaging the lock. "Savannah, what the hell is going on?" She told him everything. The genetic marker, her own test results, the faculty members she'd identified, Dr. Hartwell's phone call, and now this package. Marcus listened without interrupting, his expression growing more concerned with each revelation. So you're telling me that you've discovered a genetic predisposition to violence. You carry the marker yourself, and now unknown parties are blackmailing you for information. He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture she recognized from their most stressful graduate school days. This is insane. I know how it sounds, but look at the evidence. She showed him the genetic analysis, the database results, the photographs. Someone has been watching me, and they know exactly what I've discovered. They want to meet tonight. Marcus studied the surveillance photos with the analytical eye that made him such a good researcher. These are professional quality. Whoever took them had access to advanced equipment and knew your schedule perfectly. This isn't some random academic rivalry, which is why I can't go alone. I need you to know everything in case something happens to me. Nothing's going to happen to you because you're not going to this meeting, Marcus's voice carried the same protective tone she remembered from when they defended each other during brutal thesis presentations. This is clearly a trap, but if I don't go, they'll destroy my career and expose the other faculty members. Patricia Wong, James Miller, Sarah Thompson. They don't know about their genetic profiles, and they don't deserve to have their lives ruined because of my research. Marcus began pacing the small laboratory, his mind clearly racing through possibilities. There has to be another way. What if we contact campus security or the FBI? This sounds like industrial espionage or worse. And tell them what? That I've been secretly investigating colleagues based on genetic predispositions? That I have discovered a biological marker for violence, but can't prove it predicts actual behavior? They'll think I'm either lying or insane. The afternoon passed in tense discussion as they tried to develop alternative plans. Marcus wanted to contact authorities, create backup copies of all research data, and establish safe communication protocols. Savannah felt torn between protecting her colleagues and preserving the integrity of scientific research that could help or harm millions of people. By evening, they'd reached a compromise. Savannah would go to the meeting, but Marcus would monitor from a distance with campus security on standby. They'd developed a simple communication system using text messages, and he'd call for help if she didn't check in every 15 minutes. Riverside Park felt different at night, shadows stretching between trees in ways that created perfect hiding spots for surveillance or worse. Savannah arrived 10 minutes early, positioning herself where she could see anyone approaching while maintaining escape routes in multiple directions. The woman who emerged from the darkness looked nothing like she'd expected. Young, professionally dressed, with an air of competence that suggested military or law enforcement background. She approached with confident strides, showing no fear despite being alone in a dark park. "Dr. Grace, thank you for coming. My name is Agent Sarah Chen, and I represent interests that don't align with Dr. Hartwell's organization. Let me guess, another federal agency that wants to weaponize my research." Agent Chen smiled grimly. "Actually, we want to prevent that from happening. Dr. Hartwell works for a private contractor that specializes in genetic profiling for law enforcement and military applications. They want to use your research to justify preemptive detention of people who carry certain genetic markers. The revelation hit Savannah like a physical blow. Her research, intended to understand the biological basis of criminal behavior, was being corrupted into a tool for genetic discrimination on a massive scale. What do you want from me? We want you to destroy your research and disappear. New identity, new location, new career. In exchange, we'll protect the faculty members you've identified and ensure that this genetic marker research never sees the light of day. Savannah felt the weight of an impossible choice settling on her shoulders. She could sacrifice her life's work to protect innocent people, or she could risk everything to ensure that legitimate scientific research wasn't buried by fear and conspiracy. I need time to decide. You have until Thursday. After that, Dr. Hartwell's people will move forward with or without your cooperation, and we won't be able to protect you or anyone else. As Agent Chun disappeared back into the shadows, Savannah realized that her discovery had forced her into a position where any choice would result in someone getting hurt. The question now was whether she had the courage to make the right decision, whatever that might be. Thursday morning arrived with a clarity that surprised Savannah. She'd spent 2 sleepless nights weighing her options, and the answer had finally emerged from the chaos of fear and uncertainty. She wasn't going to run, and she wasn't going to let others weaponize her research. Instead, she was going to do something that terrified her more than any conspiracy. She was going to tell the truth. Marcus found her in the laboratory at dawn, surrounded by printed copies of every research file, genetic analysis, and piece of evidence they'd gathered. She'd been working all night, preparing for what she decided would be her final act as a genetic researcher. "You're not seriously planning to go public with this," he said, surveying the organized chaos of documentation. "I'm calling a press conference for this afternoon. I'm going to announce our discovery, explain its implications, and reveal that I carry the genetic marker myself." Her voice carried a steadiness that surprised them both. "I'm also going to make all our data freely available to the scientific community, so no single organization can control or suppress it." Marcus sat down heavily in the chair across from her desk. "Savannah, you realize this will destroy your career? Even if people believe your research, they'll never look at you the same way again. You'll be the scientist who discovered she might be genetically predisposed to violence. Maybe. Or I might be the scientist who proved that genetics isn't destiny." She held up a thick folder containing her observations of Patricia Wong, James Miller, and the other faculty members. "I've spent 2 weeks documenting how people with this genetic marker actually behave, and what I found might be even more important than the original discovery." She explained her theory about enhanced self-control and ethical awareness in people who carried the marker. Her observations suggested that individuals with the genetic predisposition weren't more violent, they were more consciously peaceful, as if they'd learned to counteract their biological inclinations through deliberate moral choices. If I'm right, this research could revolutionize how we understand moral development and self-control, but only if it remains in the scientific community rather than being buried by conspirators, or weaponized by people who want to use genetics to justify discrimination. Marcus reviewed her observational data with the careful attention he'd always brought to their collaboration. "This is actually brilliant work, Savannah. You've essentially conducted a naturalistic study of high-functioning individuals with genetic predisposition. But are you prepared for the personal cost?" Before she could answer, her phone rang with Dr. Hartwell's number. She put it on speaker so Marcus could hear the conversation. "Dr. Grace, I trust you've considered our offer carefully. Are you ready to discuss collaboration?" "I've made my decision, Dr. Hartwell. I'm going public with the research this afternoon. All of it, including your attempts to suppress and weaponize the findings." The silence on the other end stretched for several seconds. When Dr. Hartwell spoke again, her voice had lost all pretense of professional courtesy. "That would be extremely unwise, Dr. Grace. You have no idea what forces you're dealing with. Then maybe it's time for those forces to operate in the light instead of the shadows." Savannah felt a strange calm settling over her. "The press conference is at 2 p.m. in the university's main auditorium. You're welcome to attend and explain your organization's interest in genetic discrimination." She hung up before Dr. Hartwell could respond, then immediately called Agent Chen with the same information. If multiple factions wanted to control her research, she'd give them all an opportunity to make their arguments publicly. The press conference drew a larger crowd than Savannah had expected. Science journalists, university administrators, students, faculty, and several people she didn't recognize filled the auditorium. Dr. Hartwell sat in the third row, her expression unreadable. Agent Chun wasn't visible, but Savannah suspected she was present in some capacity. "Ladies and gentlemen, 3 years ago, MY research partner Marcus Thompson and I began investigating the genetic basis of criminal behavior. What we discovered challenges fundamental assumptions about free will, moral responsibility, and the nature of evil itself." She presented their findings methodically, explaining the genetic marker, its correlation with criminal behavior in their original sample, and her subsequent discovery that many law-abiding citizens carried the same genetic predisposition. She showed photographs and data from her observational study, making the case that the marker might actually be associated with enhanced moral awareness rather than inevitable violence. Then came the moment that would define the rest of her life. "I need to tell you something else. I carry this genetic marker myself, as do several respected members of our university community who have given me permission to share their stories." Patricia Wong stood up in the audience, followed by James Miller and Sarah Thompson. One by one, they walked to the front of the auditorium to stand beside Savannah people who had chosen to embrace transparency rather than hide from their genetics. "We're not monsters," Savannah continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "We're not ticking time bombs or future criminals. We're people who happen to carry a genetic predisposition that requires us to be more conscious about our choices, more deliberate about doing good in the world. And maybe that consciousness, that deliberate effort to be better than our biology suggests, is something all of humanity could learn from." The questions from reporters were intense but fair. Dr. Hartwell left halfway through the session, presumably to explain to her superiors why their recruitment efforts had failed so spectacularly. Agent Shun approached afterward to tell Savannah that her courage had eliminated the need for more drastic protective measures. 6 months later, Savannah's research had sparked a global conversation about genetics, free will, and moral responsibility. She testified before Congress, consulted with ethics committees, and helped draft legislation protecting people from genetic discrimination. Her university had created a new institute for moral genetics with her as the founding director. The genetic marker that had once terrified her had become the foundation for a new understanding of human nature, one that emphasized choice over destiny, consciousness over biology, and the incredible power of ordinary people to be deliberately good in a world that sometimes suggested otherwise. As she often told her students, discovering you carry genes for violence isn't a curse. It's an opportunity to prove that being human means choosing to be better than your biology demands. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe for more psychological thrillers that explore the mysteries of human nature. Share your thoughts in the comments about genetics versus free will, and don't forget to like this video to help others discover these mind-bending tales. What would you do if you discovered you carried genes predisposing you to violence? Let us know below.